The morning breaks quietly over the camp of Bureij in central Gaza. Then the silence fractures, gunshots echo in the air, fired skyward as hundreds of men, women and children gather in the narrow streets. Beneath the rising dust and cries, they are waiting for what they never wanted to receive, the bodies of those who will never return alive. Palestinians crowd around a stretcher wrapped in white cloth, the green of Hamas flags fluttering above it. The body of a fighter, recently handed over by Israel, lies motionless as the mourners chant prayers. The air is heavy, dense with the sound of weeping and the staccato bursts of gunfire, part mourning, part defiance. For the people of Gaza, this scene has repeated far too many times, but today carries a different weight. Israel has returned 135 bodies, victims of war, some civilians, some fighters, as part of a fragile ceasefire deal. The exchange, confirmed by the Hamas-run health ministry, follows weeks of negotiations brokered by mediators, hoping to prevent another collapse of talks. Men lift the stretchers high and begin to move through the camp's narrow alleys. Women watch from balconies, holding photographs and whispering prayers. Children run behind the procession, clutching the hands of their mothers. The air fills with chants, cries of Allahu Akbar rising in waves as the crowd swells. The procession winds its way toward the local cemetery, the same ground that has been reopened again and again to receive the dead. White shrouds glimmer faintly under the sunlight. Some are marked with the names of towns, Rafah, Khan Yunis, Jabalia, where the bodies were originally recovered. Others remain unidentified, known only by the numbers written in marker on the cloth. A man, his face lined with exhaustion, tells reporters that this is not closure. It is another chapter of loss. We bury them, but we don't bury the pain, he says softly. His brother's remains are among those returned. At least now we can pray over him. Before, we didn't even know where he was. Nearby, a group of young men fire rifles into the air, an old tradition of farewell, but also a statement of endurance. The sound echoes across the rooftops, mingling with the call to prayer from a distant mosque. The ceasefire, announced earlier in the week, had raised cautious hope across the enclave. For the first time in months, aid trucks entered more freely through the Rafah and Kerem Shalom crossings. But even as the ceasefire took hold, distrust lingered. Israeli officials said the return of bodies was a humanitarian gesture, not a political concession. Hamas called it a step toward accountability, though its leaders insisted that true justice would only come when the blockade ends and reconstruction begins. In Bureij, the politics of the ceasefire feel distant. Here, the loss is intimate. Families cling to the coffins, crying out names, verses and memories. The smell of rosewater and dust hangs in the air. Volunteers move among the crowd, spraying perfume on the shrouds, a final act of respect before burial. An elderly woman wails as the body of her grandson passes by. "He was only 20, she cries. "He wanted to study engineering." They said he was a fighter, but he was just defending our street. Her words capture the blurred lines that define Gaza's wars, where resistance, survival, and tragedy are often inseparable. Across Gaza, similar processions unfold simultaneously in Khan Yunis, in Rafah, in Gaza City's Shati camp. Each return is marked by gunfire and prayer, by anger and exhaustion. For the bereaved, the bodies offer a rare certainty in a war defined by disappearances. For many families, months of searching end here, in the crowd, under the eyes of cameras and neighbours who understand their grief too well. The health ministry says forensic teams have worked for days to identify the remains. Some were exhumed from temporary graves in Israel, others recovered from battlefields or hospitals. In several cases, only fragments were found, rings, watches or scraps of clothing, the last traces linking the dead to the living. At the front of the Bureij procession, men raise flags bearing the images of those who died. Their faces, printed on glossy paper, smile in photographs taken before the war. Now the same faces are carried above rows of shrouded forms, life and death moving side by side. A local imam begins the funeral prayer, his voice amplified through a small loudspeaker. "We return them to the earth," he says, "but we do not forget their names." The crowd repeats the words. The chant rolls outward, past the cemetery gates, across the ruins of nearby buildings that still bear the scars of bombardment. International monitors have quietly praised the body handover as a sign that both sides remain engaged in the truce process. Yet even here, Optimism is fragile. Every day brings reports of sporadic shelling, of aid delays, of political accusations traded across negotiating tables in Cairo and Doha. For the families gathered in Bureij, those debates feel meaningless beside the reality before them. One father kneels beside a coffin and presses his forehead against the cloth. "He was my eldest," he says. "He had 2 daughters. How do I tell them this is peace?" As the last of the coffins are lowered into the ground, the crowd begins to disperse, but the sounds of mourning linger. In the background, young men continue to fire rifles into the air, their faces solemn. Some carry posters of the dead, others wrap themselves in flags. The cemetery becomes a forest of colour, white, green and black, waving gently in the wind. Journalists note that this is the largest single return of bodies since the start of the conflict last year. Israeli officials said the remains were handed over through coordination with the Red Cross. The transfer, they added, was conducted in accordance with international humanitarian procedures. But for Palestinians, these technicalities matter little. What matters is that their loved ones are finally home, even if home is now a grave. Throughout the afternoon, more families arrive, walking from neighbouring camps. They bring flowers, Qurans, and bottles of water to pour over the freshly covered graves. A boy no older than 10 kneels and places a small toy on one of the mounds. His uncle explains that it belonged to his cousin, a reminder that even childhood has not been spared. The camera captures faces turned skyward, eyes closed, lips moving in prayer. In the background, black smoke still rises faintly from the northern horizon, a reminder that the ceasefire, though holding, is far from complete. The promise of calm remains delicate, balanced between politics and pain. As evening approaches, the voices of the mourners fade into a low hum. A gentle wind moves through the cemetery, carrying the scent of soil and incense. Volunteers begin to collect the empty stretchers. A few men stay behind, reciting verses by the graveside. One of them looks into the camera and says quietly, "This is not the end. We are still counting the missing." In the days ahead, negotiations will continue. Israeli media report that the return of bodies was paired with discussions about hostage exchanges and border arrangements. Hamas officials in Gaza insist that every name, every body is part of the bargaining, that human dignity itself has become a currency in this long war. Human rights groups are urging both sides to expand the effort, demanding access for international investigators to identify mass graves and confirm the causes of death. For now, though, most Gazans are focused on mourning, not politics. The funerals offer a rare moment of collective mourning, a brief space to cry, pray and remember amid the endless rhythm of war. Back in Bureij, as the crowd disperses, one man stays behind, sitting on a low wall overlooking the graves. He speaks to no one, just stares at the rows of freshly turned earth. "We keep hearing about peace," he murmurs, "but all we see are bodies coming home." The night deepens. The camp grows quiet once more, punctuated only by the distant echo of gunfire. Somewhere beyond the horizon, negotiators are still talking, diplomats are still drafting statements, and the world is still watching. But here, in the heart of Gaza, grief remains the only language everyone understands. The final image fades slowly, a wide shot of the cemetery, shrouded in twilight. White mounds line the sand, each marked with a name, a prayer, or sometimes just a number. In the fading light, the wind carries a single sound, the murmur of families promising never to forget.